I'll read out a question that I received from a seeker on spiritual awakening. And it says, can awakening, or rather our practices, cause us to dull our minds? I have noticed that increasingly I cannot think of a word or name when I am describing something. I also find myself in the middle of a thought or contemplation, and suddenly whatever I'm thinking about just slips through my mental fingers and is gone. Could this be a result of my meditation practice, which is to let thoughts and feelings come and go? In other words, a meditation without focus upon breath or a mantra, etc. Or might I instead be experiencing early onset dementia? I'm 47 and watching as my 77-year-old mom is losing her short-term memory, and I'm curious if my observable cognitive decline are the early signs of dementia. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts and understand you are not offering a diagnosis or advice. Of course, because I'm not qualified to offer a diagnosis or an advice on the subject, but I will give my thought. This is a very interesting question. Can awakening, or rather practices, cause us to dull our minds? Both yes and no. It depends. Sometimes it is in the structure, or let's say destiny, of a biological organism to have a decline in the brain function. And in that case, a decline happens even after awakening. However, you will notice that such people are not intellectually very active. That means they will not be giving clever arguments. They will not be engaging in debates or giving long sermons. All they will do is sit in peace and smile at you. And that alone is enough. Even with the dull mind, they know, there is a knowing that there is something beyond that never dies, that never changes, that never becomes dull. So, even if the mind dulls or nods, it's of no consequence to them. They just live in that constant, more or less constant, state of peace. Accepting that whatever is happening as per the cosmic law or destiny of the individual mind-body organism. Now, regarding practices, I would say that all practices are beneficial. Even meditation is beneficial, but they all have temporary effect. For example, you may meditate and you may find your mind becoming quiet, but that will happen temporarily, and when you get up and go about your life, all the stimulus of the world will come. So your mind habitually will react to those stimulus, to that stimuli. Now, do the practices help? Yes. But what helps eventually is not just the practices, but an understanding. And that understanding is that mind, or the separate self, as I talk about, is not attached to its stories. It is not living in a future fantasy, an imaginary future fantasy. And also at the same time, it is not lurking into the dead past. Lurking into the past creates sadness, which is expenditure on the brain. Lurking into the imaginary future creates anxiety, which is a tremendous expenditure on the brain. So, if the mind is habitually conditioned to move, and it thinks that movement is its only nature, if you believe that mind is all you are and movement is all you are, I am this, I am that, my bills, my life, what did I do in the past? What will I do in the future? What if my bank balance finishes? What if my relationships break? What if I don't earn enough money? What if the mind constantly creates all these imaginary projections, it remains anxious. And anxiousness is a tremendous waste of resource. It is a tremendous waste of energy. So the brain cells definitely, the body is stressed, the nervous system is stressed, and brain has to do a lot of processing. Therefore, one does experience a cognitive decline. Now, this is just my concept. I may be completely wrong on this, but it is just my concept. But when this mind understands its true nature, that it is not the movement, it may still do the practice, but practices are done for their own sake and not to achieve an outcome. Therefore, practices are not linked to a movement, a particular movement in future or past. Practices are just done for the sake of keeping the organism fit and happy and peaceful in the moment. But when the personal stories drop, the fantasies drop, and one is rooted in the pure presence which is here and now, when one gives up the sense of separation, separateness, and becomes rooted and totally present here and now in this pure peace, that is when the brain is most sharp and most alert. I was just told by a friend that there was an experiment conducted on this, where they observed people who lived in cities and lived what we call as normal life, working their whole life and then, living in the cities with paying bills and, struggling with financial and relationship stuff. For them, the cognitive decline was almost there. It was documented that the cognitive decline is in fact faster. But then they took up a few monks, women monks from monasteries, and they studied their brain. And it was found that their brain, despite their age, was so sharp, and they were learning new languages. They were exploring new things. Why does that happen? That happens because they have suspended their belief in the movement of mind. They do not take it seriously. So drama is happening all around us, and it will always happen. That is life. But when we give up involvement in the drama, knowing that I cannot truly know what's going on there, I just keep to myself and be concerned with my own peace, which is here and now, which is not in the movement. That is when the mind becomes peaceful. That is the conservation of energy. And that brings up creativity. That brings up joy, peace, happiness that we seek. But when we are too caught up in the worldly things, and too caught up with the idea that we somehow have to become better, we somehow have to be more productive, more effective, then we are completely caught up. And we are doing nothing but just damaging our cognitive thinking, our intelligence, which can be used for other creative purposes. Ramesh Balsekar, even at the age of 92 and 93, was so active and so sharp. He was sharp as a 20-year-old. And he could talk to people, he could answer people. Now his body was surely giving up. He had limitations and he accepted them. But mentally, he was alert. So how does this alertness comes? This alertness comes by giving up belief in your separateness and completely remaining in this zone of pure peace, which is here and now. That is all that the masters have said. Practices are all good. I do practices myself, so I will never tell you that practices are useless. All practices are good. But there has to be a fundamental understanding that when you are rooted in the present, in your own beingness, that is when you are most alert, because you're not caught up in any concept. You're not caught up in the duality of right and wrong. That is when your brain works optimally. That is when the highest creative expression will emerge from you. That is the best way to channel the impersonal energy as creative output. If you are caught up, if you are identified with an outcome, that I'm doing this work and I want this work to be perceived well, otherwise it will shatter my reputation. Reputation which is past, tied to an outcome which is in future, then you are lurking in this past and future. And what you're missing is the joy of this present moment, which remains unaffected by what is happening around. So yes, even if let's say that the brain function is not optimal at an old age, and it may not, the peace is never lost. And when you see an elderly who listen to you, they do not give clever arguments, but they just listen to you and smile with compassion and love to whatever you're saying, that's an indication that something has happened here, that the understanding has happened here. But if they are constantly complaining and delusional, if they're constantly thinking about starting a business or, somehow making more money, which I witnessed personally in an elderly, then that means that there's a lot of story that one has not been able to let go of. So I came across a 98-year-old man who was basically speaking to his daughter on his deathbed and was saying that he has started a new catering business and that the government has facilitated him with honors and medals for the work he has done in the past. And of course, none of that was true. Now the daughter listened compassionately. The daughter was holding his hand and loving him because it was his last moment. But you see, the brain was completely destroyed by living constantly in fantasies in the young age. He probably wanted to start his own catering business, or probably dreamt of being awarded by the government for his work, and that never happened. So the fantasy was alive in the mind. Oh, I have to achieve this. And it was finding expression in the old age. The mind was delusional. Whereas, even with physical limitations, the mind that has learned to be at rest in the early years continues with that peace and calmness even in the old age. Yes, there may be moments of delusion here and there. It can happen. It can happen. But overall, you will find that they are at peace. There is no restlessness. Their energy is pure and peaceful. And one way to know that peace is to be around them and see how you feel. When you feel pleasant in their presence, you know that they are exuding peace. Even if they may say something which is not true. Deep down, they know that peace, and their silence exudes that peace. And I will cover a small portion which was mentioned in the comment. So here he or she says, might I instead be experiencing early onset of dementia? Let's not assume, because even with all the modern technology, we can never be sure about these things. Yes, that may be, or it may be just, something which comes with aging. I'm 47 and watching as my 77-year-old mom is losing her short-term memory. And I'm curious if my observable cognitive decline are early signs of dementia. This is precisely what I'm talking about. The preoccupation with what if? The preoccupation with what if my cognitive decline is already happening? That thought itself is going to make the mind restless. Because when you'll think about it, there will be anxiousness. Anxiousness will cause energy wastage. You will use the mind to get around it. You will say, oh, I'm feeling anxious that I may be having symptoms of early signs of dementia. However, if one gives up completely and lives with the attitude that yes, all of this may be happening, but none of it changes who I am. I am Sat, being, consciousness, Chit, and bliss, Ananda, which is here and now as this, whatever is arising. When I know that deep down I am peace, I am the nature, the pure nature, which is not separate from the rest, then I do not cling to stories. I enjoy the stories, of course. I enjoy the stories. Even the horrifying stories are enjoyed. But I do not cling to any story as my personal story. That is true meditation. Meditation is being completely rooted in the moment, allowing all that surfaces. And that can be done with compassion, a lot of compassion. So, if this is happening in your case where the thought breaks down, that is the dawn of spiritual awakening, which is called witnessing. Witnessing is when the mind completely cuts off and it gets rooted into the present moment. The thought gets cut off. You see your mind as thinking, and in that seeing itself, there is a breakdown of the thought structure. And then you experience peace, a lot of peace. There are no practices to make that happen more. Because if you try to make it happen, then you're using again the mind. And if you notice, the breakdown of thought has happened spontaneously. It has happened instantaneously. So witnessing just happens instantaneously, and it happens when it is destined to happen, not through the practices. But that said, when it happens, it starts increasing its frequency. It happens more frequently. And one experiences oneself more and more in this peaceful, loving presence. One abides more and more in that. So there is nothing to be done other than just to allow whatever is happening, and also keep the practices going on. There is no harm in those practices. They are all beautiful. But do not try to put two and two together here, because our mind cannot actually make sense of any of this. Why it is happening, where it is happening. Just enjoy. Enjoy this very moment. Live it fully. And let the mind do whatever it's doing. The mind has its own destiny, which is not determined by the mind. So let the mind become dull if it becomes dull. Once awakening happens, there's usually not much concern with what happens in future. One can be totally present here and now. And this here and now is unconditional love. Here and now is your mind most alert, most receptive, because there is no judgment, there is no contemplation in this moment or now. It is free from all mental movements. So I hope that answers your question.